Welcome back to another weekly Forex forecast, traders. I am FX Telepath. I've been doing these forecasts for 6 years, and we will always start with the US dollar. So this past week on Friday here, we did see Powell indicate that we may be getting some interest rate cuts for the US dollar as the Fed proceeds carefully. With that being said, that's why we saw that massive red candle spike in the DXY, very visible over here on the 4-hour time frame. If you've been following my forecast for the last couple weeks, I pointed out this old weekly zone here, which we already got a move off of, and then this weekly zone, which we've already got a move off of. More importantly, this big dotted line that you see here and here, that represents an overall monthly demand zone. So I am actually still remaining bullish on the dollar. I will admit that obviously it is looking very weak. We will show the lower time frames here in a little bit, but based off of our higher time frame analysis, we have had to go with US dollar longs both times as we contacted these weekly zones. And I mean, we got some nice trades coming out of these zones, and that's why I was telling everybody, be careful shorting the dollar as we contact these areas of demand. But just like this demand zone failed, to me it looks like it's almost the same thing could be taking place. What we will be monitoring on the daily time frame is this daily upward trend. Now, I know we've seen a massive drop. It's a bearish sign, absolutely. However, this trend line, in my eyes, how I see things, it is actually still being respected here. So I'm very interested to see on Monday if we can push back up and kind of continue to trade in this trend, or if we actually will close, below the trend line. Monday is going to be a very significant day for the US dollar because, in my opinion, that's where we're going to get the indication of what's going to be taking place on the trend line. Was this just one big fake out to the downside, or will we continue to go to the downside? Was this just the start of the move? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Me personally, I mostly like to focus on technical analysis. So as long as this trend line's holding and that weekly demand is holding down below, I'm going to remain bullish on the US dollar, at least in the midterm. It doesn't mean that I won't take US dollar short trades, guys. We definitely do. It's just something to consider. Now, on the 4-hour chart, beautiful 4-hour downward trend. Things are looking really strong here, and that downward trend was actually, that upward momentum was removed by this pretty much massive drop here, and that has given us a very clean looking downward trend line. So this downward trend line on the 4-hour chart is going to be pretty much the second most important factor. So if you were a day trader this week, you can ignore that daily upward trend that I was talking about on the DXY, and you could simply be monitoring this 4-hour downward trend. And as long as this 4-hour downward trend line is holding, you definitely could justify looking for day trading shorts on a 15-minute time frame or even a 5-minute time frame on all US dollar pairs, looking for US dollar shorts. So this 4-hour downward trend line combined with the daily upward trend line is going to be very, very significant. If we continue to break up and we break this downward trend line, if we have a demand zone there, that is going to represent potentially a pretty good demand zone pullback entry on the dollar. So that is what we're going to be watching this week, this downward trend line on the 4-hour chart and that upward daily trend line on the daily time frame. And even on the 1-hour time frame, if we do get a push all the way up to this zone. Now remember, this zone was created based off of economic data and Trump talking or whatever. So not the best zone ever, but it is a decent supply. We could see a move off of it, but usually when we get these massive spikes, it's usually for a reason and really not the best supply up there. So there's a supply zone above there, but for now, guys, just to summarize, the dollar is definitely looking weaker after this Friday event that took place. However, on the daily chart, we still have that trend line that is currently in control. So we definitely want to monitor that trend line as well as the 4-hour downward trend line to kind of get the intraday direction of where we could see price going. Alrighty, on to the forecast for the Euro US dollar on the weekly chart. Weekly trend is to the upside. We expected price to go down based off of this being the opposite of the DXY, where we had the DXY weekly demand in control. We could expect price to push down. However, look at the trends. It's looking really, really strong here. On the euro, we got to be mindful that the DXY daily trend line is currently still being respected. So we have to definitely be mindful of that. Now on the daily chart, we are coming back in for a second test of this daily supply zone. This was a daily supply zone that we called out in one of the previous weekly Forex forecasts. So that's why you should probably hit that subscribe button and like this video if you're enjoying it so far. You want to subscribe so you can catch zones like this from other weekly Forex forecast videos. So I do these forecasts every single week for free. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and like the video. Second test into supply. Not my favorite situation. However, when we push into a supply zone for a second test, we usually like to monitor where we pushed into last time. And if you look, we pushed in here and we actually just broke this previous high. I don't like trading at tested zones, guys. However, since we've already broken this high, it's possible we do see a push to the downside. Again, it's a tested zone, so I'm not saying price is going to go all the way down there. However, it's possible. We'll see what happens on the US dollar. I'm just saying, since we already pushed in higher than this previous high, a lot of the times we will see a push down. So that is definitely something we could be seeing here on the euro. And if we do push down, we have tons of profit margin, down to that daily demand. But for the meantime, all we're going to be monitoring really is just this 4-hour chart. And we actually had pretty much a nice break of that downward trend line there and a new demand zone on the 4-hour chart down below. So it is longs all the way on a day trading time frame as long as this trend line is being respected. Remember, since the daily trend line is holding on the dollar, if this breaks to the downside, that US dollar analysis I had was correct, and then we got to pretty much hop on a short trade that breaks the trend line if that does take place. So that's something I will be monitoring this week. However, we will not deny the strength of the euro right now on this 4-hour chart. So as long as this trend line's holding, guys, 15-minute time frame longs are going to be completely fine. Pullback down to that 4-hour demand zone could be good as well at 116. I really think it's a pretty good zone. I don't love that it's just kind of an obvious pivot point. However, it's a good zone. Nice strong move away. We could see move off of it. The only thing that makes me nervous about it, again, is it's a pivot point and the fact that it was news related. So not really the best situation. The demand zone down below at 114 is actually better, but that's basically just the daily demand that we're looking at there. So on the euro, we're basically going to be watching this 4-hour chart and continuing to look for longs as long as that trend line is being respected on the day trading time frames. But remember, if we break that trend line, what that means is that the daily supply is being respected, and then we want to probably hop on short trades on the euro. Alrighty, on to the forecast for gold weekly chart. Just want to remind everybody, the weekly trends are up. Gold has been very difficult to trade lately, I will not lie. However, based off of the weekly trend, we have been very bullish on gold long term. On the daily chart, it really shows what's been taking place on gold. Absolutely terrible price action. We have a clear area of resistance above that could act as a liquidity search area. So that's what I'm expecting to see, targeting that liquidity and breaking to the high and going to all-time highs again. That is my long-term perspective on gold, but you can clearly see this pretty terrible just overall range that we've been sitting in. And it's been, I tell my members all the time, trading in a range is very difficult. It's something, if you are going to do, you want to be very aggressive, with your profit margin. So we're looking to get out of that range. However, we did catch a beautiful 4-hour demand zone setup right here. Beautiful trade off that demand zone that broke a trend line. Absolutely picture perfect setup, called out in the daily market breakdown videos, which are forecasts that I release every single day for the Diamond members. If you want to trade alongside myself and the community, join the Diamond membership for exclusive access to our daily market breakdown videos and catch trades like these. Plus, dive deep with our full-length forecast covering 26 plus markets, our interactive Sunday Zoom sessions, and personal homework to sharpen your strategy. And you'll also join our private Discord group for direct access to me and unlock a complete library of A to Z video lessons to master supply and demand trading. Don't miss out. Let's level up your trading. Links in the description down below. So we already got the trade off of this zone, and I just realized now we actually have very nice trend line to the upside. It's a very new trend line, I will admit. It's kind of just the start of one. However, as long as this trend line's holding, guys, 15-minute time frame longs are going to be good. Unfortunately, I couldn't point out the zone for everyone watching the forecast. That's why I do the daily market breakdown video, guys, so you can get those trades. Nice move off that zone so far. I think looking for day trading longs is completely fine right now until we can push up to that supply up there. And look, even if we break this trend line and we break this demand, that's fine. We have a very good demand zone. I'm actually going to tighten it up just a little bit. We have a very good demand zone over on gold sitting just below all this, and it's kind of acting as a support trap as well. So even if we do break that, I'm still going to be bullish on gold down there. If we break all that, okay, then maybe I'll be changing my mind. However, we want to be looking for longs right now as long as this trend line's holding. If the trend line breaks, then we need to not trade gold basically from here until we can hit this demand zone and then get our potential long trade. If gold continues to rise, it's most likely we will be targeting this liquidity here, and there is a supply zone above. Now, I am bullish on gold long term. My bias is certainly to the upside. However, you can still trade short even though your bias is to the upside. So if you are going to short up here, what I would like to see is a reaction off this resistance area to prove there is some stop losses up here and liquidity, people trading resistance. And what I'll be doing is potentially getting a quick short trade off that zone at 34.19. Again, very, very aggressive trade management. I would only be looking for a 1-to-1, 2-to-1 max. I'd be taking my stop loss and bumping it to break even or half risk as soon as we get a decent move out, because again, it is counter trend to the daily time frame. So these are the only fresh zones I'm seeing right now on gold on the 4-hour time frame. As long as this trend line's holding, it looks like we might be targeting this liquidity. So for now, it is day trading longs all the way here on gold. Alrighty, on to the forecast for the USDJPY on the weekly time frame here, top-down analysis. There's really not a lot to go off of. However, we do have a clear area of support down below. So if we do see the US dollar, the DXY, break that daily upward trend, then what we're probably going to see is a target of this liquidity on the weekly chart if the US dollar continues to go down. So that is kind of what we could see in the long run. Now, on the daily time frame, a very interesting thing happened where we broke this daily upward trend. And we are sitting basically right in the middle of supply and demand. So when that happens, we have to basically trade with the H4 trend or the H1 trend. We really have nothing to go off of here of where price is going to go. However, with this massive drop today in the US dollar, some could say we could be headed down to demand, and that would be fine. So what we are viewing this daily chart as is profit margin. If you get in long, our long-term, medium-term, whatever you want to call it, profit margin is to the daily supply. If you get in short, our profit margin is viewed to down to this daily demand at 145.23, where we can then get trades off of those zones as well on the lower time frame. So make sure you subscribe for when we hit those zones. We might be looking for some setups. Now on the 4-hour chart, we had a very nice trend line that was removed today. We still have 37 minutes left in the close, but to me, it is looking like it was removed. Now remember, guys, these zones were created based off of economic stuff, so it's really not the best zones. So again, this is created from, it seems like an emotional candle. However, there is supply above, so we certainly could see a move off the supply. However, I would definitely take it with a grain of salt, and if you're bullish, we want to wait for that to be removed for potential longs as well. Now, this demand zone was tested once, twice. This is the third time, so I really don't love the idea of getting long off this demand zone based off of this chart. However, on the 1-hour time frame, a very interesting thing took place. We had our demand zone down below, almost pushed into it, created support, and we reacted off of it to confirm that liquidity trap, and we are already getting a move off the zone. This is another trade that I was calling out in the daily breakdown videos for the Diamond members as well. And look at the move out of the zone. So with this demand zone in control, you actually could justify looking for 5-minute time frame longs as long as this demand's holding. And I don't know how much we're going to get out of this move. It's kind of tricky to tell. My opinion is maybe we could get a move up to this area here at about 147.60, maybe 147.50. I think that might be the only move we're going to get, especially if the dollar is going to break that daily trend line. So we are in a demand zone now. We could justify looking for day trading longs, but right now I think that's really about it. And look, if we break these 4-hour demand zones or the 1-hour demand zones, that's definitely going to be an indication over on the daily time frame that we'll be pulling back into that daily demand, and then any supply zone on the 1-hour chart that removes that demand, if that does take place, is going to represent a pretty good shorting opportunity. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what takes place this week on the USDJPY and whether or not we'll be pulling back down to the daily demand or up to the daily supply. Alrighty, on to the forecast for the GBPUSD. Very, very tricky top-down analysis here, but we will start with the weekly chart. We have a weekly demand and control and a weekly trend. You pretty much can't ask for anything better than that. However, remember, the DXY is in a monthly demand, so that is why we could expect price to drop based off of the DXY. But however, if we ignore that, I mean, look, we have a weekly demand and control, got a beautiful move off this weekly demand, and a weekly trend to the upside. So really, based off of just this chart, if we don't look at the DXY, it was pretty much longs all the way. Now, on the daily time frame here, we had this daily supply, called that one out back in middle of July, I think. Got a beautiful trade off of that supply zone. So you can go back and watch my previous forecasts on YouTube and see me calling out this supply zone. So no nonsense here, no hindsight. It's everything we talk about. Every zone I point out that we called out, there's video evidence of it, not just fake screenshot P&Ls and all that crap. So we pushed back into the supply for a second time. We honestly got a bigger move off of it than I expected, but to me, it looks like we are going to be pushing back in for a third test, which in my opinion, at that point, I would expect it to fail. However, one thing is very interesting here. We barely pushed above this area. So it's possible we even push above here, get another kind of small move, and then rally out. So there could be potential short trade profit opportunities. It's just you got to be looking for confirmation in there. Very, very sketchy. So as far as trading it goes, we have a pretty good demand zone down below. And I'm going to tighten up just a little bit. I think I drew this one on my phone this morning. So we did break this downward trend line. Again, this is a trade. This is a move away from economic situations, so not really the best situation. However, it's a demand zone. We could see a pullback down to that demand. But something interesting is on this chart as well. A very, very clear area of support liquidity with a very nice original demand zone, a nice rally base, rally original zone. So even if we break this zone down below, I think it's still a good trade down below there. And like, let's say you want to get crazy and you want to trade both zones. What I would do is, if you're going to get long on this zone, I would risk 0.5% and I would save my full 1% risk on the zone down below. And if you do get long in the zone, I would be looking to be aggressive with trade management, because the better zone is sitting down below with all this liquidity to target. So if you are going to get in long in the zone, as soon as price goes 1-to-1, I'd be putting my stop to break even, or taking 0.5% off or 50% off your trade, whatever you got to do to manage that risk based on the fact that the better zone is sitting down below. And then like maybe you take profit, boom, hit this zone, full 1% risk, and you get a nice 3-to-1. That's how I would view this chart. On the pound US dollar, just because again it's a little risky with that better zone sitting below all that liquidity, and the fact that these zones, a lot of these zones were created on Friday, again based off of the economic data. So not the best, or the symposium or whatever, so not the best situation. However, a zone is a zone. On to the forecast for the USDCAD. This is where I grew up. This is where I am from and currently living. Let me know where you guys are all from in the comments down below. I'm always interested to see all the countries. Sometimes there's countries I've never even heard of, to be honest, but I am not a geographical genius or anything. I don't know too much about all that stuff, but let me know. Anyways, we've been seeing the USDCAD rally for the past couple weeks now because of this weekly demand in control, and not only that, a trend line in control as well. So our long-term perspective is to the upside, especially since we have a very nice daily trend to the upside, and we have a very nice 4-hour trend to the upside as well. Things got a little crazy here, but this trend line just barely is holding on. If we do push down to it, I'm not sure what's going to take place. Kind of tricky. However, the trends are still to the upside, so I do prefer potential long trades here still. On the 1-hour chart, we did break this trend line. We broke this demand zone here, pulled back into this better demand zone, which was basically, this demand zone was the origin of the move. This demand zone was kind of just in the middle of the move, and sometimes the one in the middle of the move holds. That's why it was a pretty decent demand zone. Nonetheless, we have a 1-hour demand zone in control. So as long as this 1-hour demand zone's holding, 5-minute time frame longs are going to be good. A little bit risky, right? It kind of seems like catching a falling knife, and it was kind of risky, right? I'd rather see a pullback to these zones right here and right here, rather than pushing all the way up here, than getting down to the zone with a massive drop. Kind of sketchy, right? Not my favorite situation. However, with the 1-hour demand zone in control, you definitely could justify looking for 5-minute time frame longs. And like I said, that 4-hour trend line is being respected as well. So 15-minute time frame longs are also going to be fine. And like, look, let's say we break this demand zone, that's fine. If there's a supply zone there, we can get a short trade off of that, and I'll have this zone for all the members as well. So definitely setting up for some nice trading opportunities here on the USDCAD. For now, we want to monitor that 1-hour zone, be day trading long in that zone, and then obviously trading with that 4-hour trend line to the upside on the day trading timeframes. All right, on to the forecast for the AUDUSD. Looking at the weekly chart here, not because there's anything going on, but just I wanted to show that there really has not been a lot going on the Aussie. The last year, really, it's been quite terrible, if I'm being honest. At least as far as a higher time frame perspective is. However, this past couple weeks here, we did get a nice break of this upward trend line that we finally got. That trend line was removed by supplies and above. We just barely missed that supply. So if we do push up to the supply, I still think it's an area we could see a potential short trade off of. So you could be looking for some quick short trades off of that supply zone. On the daily chart, though, we have a beautiful daily downward trend line, so it's definitely something we are going to monitor, especially if you are swing trading. So our bias technically is to the downside right now based off of this daily downward trend line. Obviously, nobody will deny the strength of this move right here, but this is why it's important to zoom out. You can't be hyper zoomed in. Look at this downward trend. That's why multiple time frame and higher time frame analysis is so important, which is what we touch on a lot in the membership. So on the 4-hour chart here, we had a nice 4-hour downward trend, and that trend was removed. And that trend was removed by a 4-hour demand zone. Just like a lot of the other pairs, we created a 4-hour demand zone with a support trap liquidity demand zone sitting right below. So it's kind of a weird situation, but kind of the same thing applies. If you want to get in long at this zone, I would risk a little bit less and look to be aggressive with trade management, because there's a support liquidity zone sitting right below that I personally believe is a higher odds situation. So this demand zone down below is better to risk more money on. That's how I would view that. If we continue to push up, we do have a supply zone above. Now this supply zone was basically a reaction from a previous supply zone that was called out in previous daily market breakdown videos and forecasts. So it's not my favorite zone based off of that. We already got that trade. However, it's still a decent supply that did break an opposing trend line. So if we do push up to it, I think we could see a move off of it. How big of a move? Not really sure how, based on the fact that it's kind of based off of an older zone. I would be aggressive with trade management off of that zone as well here on the Aussie US dollar. So right now we want to monitor the 2 4-hour zones I was pointing out. Be very aggressive if you want to take that first zone, because the better demand zone is actually sitting right below. And we also definitely want to monitor the daily downward trend line, so we can monitor basically our higher time frame bias to decide where the appropriate place and how much profit we can look for when trading long or short. All right, on to the forecast for the USD Swiss. So we do have a very old weekly demand zone in control. That is why we have seen price rally up a little bit here. And it correlates with the DXY as well. But if we break the DXY trend line, we might be breaking that weekly demand, which means we could be breaking this weekly demand as well on the USD Swiss. Now, as far as trading it goes now, it's a little bit tricky. I would be mostly focused on this 4-hour chart right here. The 4-hour chart is telling a very, very clear story. The story right now is that we have a nice 4-hour downward trend that was just created today, the trend line was updated today. Very nice 4-hour trend with a very clean 4-hour demand zone down below. I personally think this 4-hour demand zone is good for potential long trades. If you are bullish to the USD Swiss, this 4-hour demand zone is basically a reaction off of the weekly zone. So it's a very, very powerful demand zone in my opinion. So how do we go about and trade the USD Swiss right now? What you could be doing right now, as long as this downward trend line is holding, 15-minute time frame shorts are completely fine. People ask me, what does that mean? If you trade supply and demand zones on a 15-minute chart, perfect. If you trade support and resistance on a 15-minute chart, great. Chart patterns on a 15-minute chart, however you like to trade, 15-minute time frame shorts are good as long as this downward trend line is being respected. And I would be looking to take profit as we contact this 4-hour demand zone or as we get close. Maybe this zone could completely break, so maybe it just means you take your stop loss and keep bumping it up, and maybe you get even more out of it as price pushes down if we break all of those zones. So whatever you do, this kind of represents our profit margin from here down to this 4-hour demand zone. So I would be aggressive with your trade once we hit that zone, because I think it could be a valuable dip buying opportunity as well. And again, day trading shorts down to that demand zone, pullback for potential long trades. Now, let's say we push up here. Let's say we break this 4-hour trend line with a demand zone there. That demand zone could be a good potential buying opportunity as well. And then obviously if we push up to this, there's a great supply zone sitting right above. I want to see another reaction off this resistance to prove there's liquidity here. Then this supply zone becomes higher odds. It's still a good zone anyways. I just would rather it be a higher odds situation. So I want to see a reaction off of that resistance area. So a very, very clear chart here on the USD Swiss. Great demand zone for potential long, great supply zone for a potential short. Nice 4-hour downward trend line we want to be trading with until we can hit that demand zone down below. Remember guys, any questions at all, do not hesitate to leave a comment. I will respond to every single comment. And also guys, very, very important, I am thinking about adding the S&P 500 in to next week's forecast for the time being. Let me know what you guys think of that. If there's any other market you guys would like, I'm only going to be adding one. So let me know in the comments down below what market you would like me to see added to these weekly Forex forecasts. Last but not least, we are onto the forecast for crude oil. And really quick, if you guys want help with trading psychology, which is arguably one of the most important parts in trading, check out my podcast, the Stoic Trading Psychology Podcast. We have many episodes. I'm going to be trying to do one more episode every single week. And I also just created a YouTube channel for the podcast as well. So make sure you go hit subscribe over to that other YouTube channel and follow along. It's very, very important, and I want to know your guys' opinion on the podcast. So higher time frame analysis here. The trend is down. So, it's a tricky situation. However, we cannot deny this weekly demand that is in control, and we cannot deny the move we have seen out of the demand so far. How much we're going to get out of this move is undetermined. I mean, we do have a trend line here. That might be the only move we are going to get, which is arguably a very big move. Could this demand zone be responsible for breaking the trend line? It's certainly possible. Right now, we have that demand zone in control, so we have to favor longs. On the daily chart, beautiful daily downward trend line that's currently being respected. So that weekly demand could get held up by this daily trend line. A weekly demand is stronger than a daily downward trend line, but it doesn't mean that this daily trend line won't hold. So as we push out of this weekly demand, this daily trend line is going to be a significant test to see if we can break it as well. Now, on the 1 hour chart, we did get a confirmation. This confirmation was by removing this area of supply. And this was a very good supply zone based on the fact that it was a resistance liquidity trap before. So we remove this supply. Usually when supply is removed, we have demand created down below. Unfortunately for us, I don't really see anything down below. I mean, you could maybe justify some sort of demand here. Not my favorite situation. I don't love drawing a demand zone so far back. So if we do pull back down this demand zone, you could look for longs in here. I would be looking to get confirmation on a 15-minute time frame though to confirm my entry in this zone. But with the weekly demand in control, we have a 1 hour trend to the upside now. So that is a very, very bullish sign. So really, honestly, as long as this 1 hour trend line is holding, it is longs all the way on the 5-minute time frame, guys. And not only is it with a 1 hour trend, but it's a 1 hour trend coming off of a weekly demand. So that's why it gives it even higher odds to get in long with this trend. So unfortunately, not a lot of great zones on crude oil for now. And also as we push up, we have this little, I don't have it as an official supply zone, but if we do break this supply here, any demand on the 4 hour chart there is going to represent a very good buying opportunity. So this is another area that we're going to want to have on our charts as well on oil. But for now, guys, we are monitoring. This week, we want to monitor that 1 hour trend line, and we want to be trading long with that 1 hour trend line on the day trading timeframes until we can at least hit this daily downward trend line and see what takes place at that daily downward trend line. If you want access to the full Forex forecast, make sure you subscribe to the Diamond membership, where you get access not only to my daily chart analysis, but also my daily forecast, where I forecast basically like this forecast, but every single day for the members. It also comes with the 38-page PDF, which is your guide for trading as well. Make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next video.